Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of March 24th, 2024. We are pleased today to offer you a fascinating insight into an event that recently transpired on March 20th through the 21st in Washington, D.C., hosted by A4LI, the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives. First, I would like to introduce our distinguished panel today. We have our U.S. Transhumanist Party officers, our Director of Visual Art, Ramon Garcia, our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg, our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer, our Foreign Ambassador in Spain and Technology Advisor, Dr. Jose Cordeiro, and we have several distinguished guests today. Our first guest of honor is our Director of Scholarship, Dr. Dan Elton, who was one of the attendees at the A4LI DC Fly-In, so-called because most of the attendees flew in from all over the country and sometimes outside the US as well. We have Adam Gries, who was a previous guest on our Virtual Enlightenment Salon, discussing the philosophy and movement of Vitalism, which he co-founded, and he was also one of the attendees of the A4LI DC Fly-In. And we may have other guests come in as the salon progresses, but for now, Dan has prepared a thorough overview of the events and conversations that he participated in. So Dan, welcome, and please go ahead. Let's see, we've got Dan's presentation.
So thank you, Gennady. It's great to be here to discuss this incredible series of events that just transpired in the last week in DC that was all organized by the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives. But first, I wanted to just pay tribute to this Werner Vinge, who I know has been an inspiration to all of us. He had a long battle with Parkinson's disease and has finally, unfortunately, succumbed to that illness. So we all looked up to him as one of the great sci-fi authors and futurists. So just give me a sec. So I just got some slides here with a lot of notes and stuff. So the first day we had Michael Stebbins and Dr. Jeffrey Ling, who are both considered co-founders of ARPA-H. So I wanted to start by talking a little bit about DARPA. DARPA was founded in 1958 in response to the Soviet Union launching Sputnik. And the name actually changed a couple times. So it started out as ARPA, or Advanced Research Projects Agency, and then in 1972 it changed to DARPA. And then 1993, I guess they wanted to try to expand the scope beyond just defense, so it went back to becoming ARPA. But then 3 years later, they reverted back to DARPA again. So that's why you often hear, the terms ARPA and DARPA kind of used interchangeably. But DARPA is really overperforms for its size. So a lot of people have been trying to figure out why DARPA is so successful as an agency. And they have been involved in a lot of different major inventions. Some of them I've listed here. They aren't necessarily completely responsible for all of these, but they definitely played a major role in a lot of these things, including like the personal computer, computer mouse, ARPANET, which was the predecessor to the internet, TCP, IP, GPS. Anyway, so there's been some attempts to replicate DARPA, such as IARPA and more recently ARPA-H. The way that DARPA is structured is there's about 100 program managers, and they serve for a limited term of 3 to 4 years initially, and then that can be renewed up to 6 years. And so that's a bit interesting. The quick turnover keeps refreshing the organization with new talent and people. Each program manager will oversee perhaps 10 to 15 grants during their tenure. Programs, they start small with about 1.5 million, which is usually put into seed grants, and then they get more money, and so DARPA grants, what I read is they're typically 0.5 to 2 million. So a bit larger than grants from, say, like NSF, and they're a little bit longer time period as well. Ben Reinhardt, who some of you know, has written a very long treatise on DARPA and interviewed a lot of former employees. And so I was looking that over before this, and he's got some high-level observations as to what makes DARPA unique. He says a big part of what a program manager does is network building. So they just network with and try to figure out who are the best talents in that domain. He also says that opacity is important. Which is interesting, the opacity of DARPA actually shields them from having to care about what politicians might think, or perhaps even what the public might think. Not that the public's really paying attention, but it shields them from having to worry about what certain Congress people might say. Some of these Congress people like to attack what they see as crazy government programs and stuff. So the opacity actually shields them from having to worry about that. Of course, things are generally like released eventually. Like information is generally provided where the money is going, but maybe not right away. The other interesting thing is it's relatively small. So at least in 2020, they only had 124 staff, which is kind of similar to what Dunbar's number, which is the number of people that you can kind of like keep in your head. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, I won't go read the rest of these, but Ben Reinhardt, he has a really long article about this if you're interested. So anyway, around 2018, people started talking about creating a DARPA for health, because people got kind of frustrated with the NIH R01 grants, and as being sort of the only way that things in healthcare would be funded. And there was a desire to have more larger and more ambitious funding, and also more translational type work, and more work that would support biotech rather than what NIH does, which is more fundamental research. So, like I said, Michael Stebbins and Geoffrey Ling, they're kind of considered the co-founders. It started with at the Suzanne Wright Foundation on their website going back to like 2018. And then Geoffrey Ling was evangelizing it for a while. You can find a video of him on Fox Business in 2018 where he was talking about it. Then in 2020, they created a white paper describing the vision. I believe it was in 2021 that Biden signed a bill that actually kicked it off. So anyway, the first day we actually heard from Michael Stebbins himself. Well, actually, the first day we heard from Geoffrey Ling, and let's see, and then someone else from ARPA-H. Let's see, I think it was Dr. Michael Stevens. Yeah, Michael Stevens also is considered a bit of a co-founder, or one of the people who was there at the beginning. Yeah, so there was talks by them at the Mayflower Hotel, and yeah, I'm just going to go through some notes from that. First of all, like Geoffrey Ling was very passionate about the need for this agency. So if we have a video clip that someone posted on Twitter that I think we can play at this point.
Agency would do work that would either affute, affirm, and thus fundamentally change clinical practice. Clinical practice. This is not about publishing papers, which I think people should do. This is not about starting companies, which they have to do. It's about changing clinical practice. Otherwise, it's a science fair project. And we know lots of those. You go to any high school, they're doing great stuff. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about changing clinical practice. Why does the U.S. not have the longest lifespan in the frickin' world? Right? Ask yourself, you're taxpayers. Do you care where your money's going? If you were buying a new car and you had the same performance metrics, you'd be pretty pissed off. So that is why we created this.
Yep. Okay, so I think the audio is a little bit quiet there, but basically he was getting frustrated with the stagnant life expectancy or even declining life expectancy. And one of the things he said right away, which kind of shocked me, is that he said that ARPA-H, as it's been created now, doesn't actually replicate DARPA, which I was kind of sad to hear. But in his view, it's very hard to replicate DARPA because the historical context is different. So DARPA existed when the U.S. was competing with the Soviet Union. And, so there was a real impetus to compete and sort of defend against the Soviet Union. So I think that attracted a lot of talent and people into government and a lot of investments. And so that social context no longer exists. But at the same time, we are still facing aging, which is really a larger threat than the Soviet Union ever was. So I hope they can recapture some of the magic of DARPA, but unfortunately, yeah, Jeffrey Ling was saying that's not really what's going on. The other thing is the funding level was really not as much as they were initially wanting. So the initial vision was for $6 billion in funding, which is compared to $48 billion going to the NIH. That ended up getting reduced to $2.5 billion in the budget request, and then ultimately they got $1.5 billion. So they'd like to get more money. They still have a goal of getting $6 billion. And then they also talked about this Patient Acceleration Technology Innovation Office, which is supposed to help companies navigate the FDA and just provide assistance to startups so they don't have to spend as much money hiring regulatory experts and consultants and all of that. So that's kind of exciting. What I learned was that ARPA-H is more translationally focused, and because I kind of had been envisioning it as more fundamental science, but it's actually very translationally focused, very focused on helping take research and get it commercialized and help companies get through the so-called valley of death, or help research get through the valley of death. There was apparently there was some pushback from the NIH. Francis Collins was in favor of ARPA-H, but apparently there was some pushback from the guy who became director after him, where they were pointing to NCATS, which is the kind of like the translational office at NIH. But fortunately, anyway, they got it founded. So yeah, here's some more notes from Jeffrey Ling. He said SBIR grants are, quote, a pain in the ass. Those are grants that you can get through a number of different agencies, including NIH, for startups, but they don't really give very much money. It's like, $200,000, which is really nothing when you're trying to, especially for biotech. So there's the government involvement in the startup ecosystem has been kind of limited, especially in biotech. Anyway, so then I'm moving on to the next day, which was Thursday. There was
this is Bernie.
Yeah.
Bernie Siegel. Can I just add a little bit, because I was in the room with you listening to that presentation?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
It was dynamic, to say the least. One of the things that struck me is Ling talked about the whole point was reducing the risk to investors, which I was thinking that's a powerful statement. And he said that it was non-dilutive funding, in effect, which is also powerful. I think the advocacy side of this should be played up more, that the advocacy movement, as such as it is, should be asking Congress for a lot more money for this program. This is the most biotech focused program. And my own observation was everyone's least favorite agency is the FDA. But anyone you talk to who knows about this, everyone's most favorite agency is ARPA-H for what it's going to do for the field. I had a lot more notes, but unfortunately they're all illegible. So I'll just stop there.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, Yeah, no, then feel free to jump in if you have any other comments. I got a lot of slides here, but I don't want to hog all the time.
Dan, should I? I wanted to add something about the first day, but I can leave it for the end. I thought it might be useful at this point for the audience.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, please.
So just very briefly, another person who presented is a gentleman called Arunan Skandaraja, and he is advising the director of ARPA-H. So, Jeffrey Lang and Michael Stebbins are not active operators in ARPA-H. I mean, maybe Jeffrey is associated in some way, but Michael Stebbins initiated, but he's not an active operator today in the system, although he recently became an advisor to A4LI, which may help them get to the right people there and influence or educate in the things that matter to some of our community. But I will say that Arunan seemed quite open-minded. He mentioned that there were 17 program managers that had, and I see that his link was shared, so thank you for that. 17 program managers, and they hope to scale that to between 60 and 100 over time. So a lot of the system is still being built up, meaning like not that many program managers have actually started receiving funding, deploying funding, etc. But I just want to mention that Arunan seemed quite open-minded to engage with a community and think about how both how to prioritize different projects, but also how ARPA-H may be able to creatively solve gaps in getting from the innovation to translation. So just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, no, thanks. I was just scrambling to try to find his name right before we started because I didn't want to skip over him. But yeah, thanks. Yeah, and he was the guy who talked about the patio office and all of that, and trying to help startups. That's a great point. Oh, and then the other thing that came up like during the discussion was that I took note on was Jeffrey Ling talked about the Framingham study on heart disease. That was a large study that was done a while ago studying risk factors for heart disease, and that's kind of become the standard for the outcomes from that study and findings have kind of laid the standard for how risk prediction is done for heart disease and how they determine like if people need statins and things like that. So I thought that was really interesting because I feel like that's what we need more of. We need more of these large studies that are looking at large cohorts and following them for extended periods. So going on to the next day, they had the congressional briefing at one of the congressional office buildings. I think it was the Rayburn building, if I remember correctly. And they had 3 longevity biotech experts come in to talk to members of Congress and congressional staffers to educate them. And I thought this was a really great event. They had a huge turnout of like 70 people. So that was really important just to show there's a lot of interest and excitement about longevity biotech. Here's a picture of me from the sign. As you can see, I was dressed pretty well. I felt like it was important to dress well for this. And then I don't have pictures of them, but the first people who spoke were from the Longevity Caucus, which A4LI has organized. I missed the very beginning of this, so I can't really talk about it. But these guys were there at least at the beginning. Paul Tonko is and Gus Bilrakis are the chairs of the Longevity Caucus. So you have both a Democrat and a Republican chair, and then and Paul Tonko has been in the House for a really long time, so he's pretty well known. He's chair of or he's on some important committees like Energy and Commerce Subcommittee, Environment, Manufacturing, and Critical Materials. So yeah, so he's a great guy to be like leading this, I think. So Sonia Arison gave some introductory remarks. And then I can't remember the order that they spoke. I think it was Matt.
It was Matt,
Cameron
Kristen,
first.
and then Joe, if I believe.
Yeah. I don't really have a lot of notes on Matt Caberlin's talk, and like I said, I got there a little bit late, so I think I got there like right when he was starting to speak. And I don't have a lot of notes on what Kristen Fortney said either, but as far as Joe Betts Lacroix, or Joe Betts LaCroix, he talked about his company Retro Biosciences and how they're working on cellular reprogramming. He described it as being similar to what is done when a egg is fertilized and you have a new cell, a new individual's starting. Essentially, the cell has a way of reverting to a more youthful state. And then there was so people are trying to discover, well, how does the cell like revert itself back to a more youthful state? That's sort of like a stem cell state. And that's where, of course, the Yamanaka factors were discovered. So I'm not really an expert, and I don't really know much about this at all. But he described it he described cellular reprogramming as taking inspiration from how the Yamanaka factors kind of revert cells back to a more juvenile or young state. And as you can see from the slide here, the mission is to extend healthy lifespan by 10 years. Notice it's healthy human lifespan, not necessarily lifespan, but healthy human lifespan. There's a picture of some of the people in the room. This is another slide I took a picture of because I thought it was interesting, and I've been interested in the FDA. He said he had this idea he was throwing out about a cost-conscious FDA. Essentially, this is another pathway to get something approved where you're not necessarily showing that you have a drug that is more effective than what's on the market, but it would be less expensive. So right now, it's very hard to get something approved unless it's better than like what the standard of care is. I'm not really sure how true that is, because there's a lot of antidepressants that are approved all the time that aren't really better. But it seems like this. It seems like this is sort of an issue. And so I thought that was interesting. I've never heard anyone talk about that being an issue. But yeah, I think there's a lot of room for new pathways at the FDA, obviously. Yeah, then there was also Matt Caberline, which some of you probably know from the Dog Aging Project, and being on various podcasts. He talked about the longevity dividend, which is, being able to reduce healthcare expenditures on the diseases of old age. And that's a concept which has gotten a lot of traction on Capitol Hill from what I've heard. Bernie or Adam, do you have any comments about the briefing?
I could weigh in a little bit on this. The first, it was interesting to me. I think it's important to understand the context of what was happening with the Alliance for Longevity Initiatives, as I'm sure it's been presented. Here it is, the launch of a new organization that's really built for lobbying lawmakers, and I think this group was the spark that launched a caucus. So we can all like to have a caucus. There are, I think, over 400 caucuses in Congress. There is one called the Bourbon Caucus that has 2 members, but some of them are quite powerful and important. And when you look at Bilirakis and Tonka, they pride themselves as being science, biomedical innovators and believers in that, and are enthusiastically bipartisan in support of this. They were both took a lot of pride in having created something called, my note says, National Plan for Parkinson's, and which I presume is related to neuroscience, and without reading it, it seems to be important and shows a measure of success. My own background has been involved a lot in the process of trying to guide FDA policy through another group that I belong to, the Alliance for Cell Therapy Now, and working with the FDA and lawmakers. And you have always a certain number of lawmakers on both sides of the aisle that are enthusiastic and promoters of regenerative medicine. And there's an intersection here that's quite obvious to me. One of them is important in this new longevity caucus, Representative Dan Crenshaw, who's a member of the GOP, most notable from his appearance. Perhaps he has an eye patch, but he's interested very much in all of this. And he's an enthusiast, and it's very important. One of the things that I would have liked to see more at the event were more policy people from individual congressional offices. The next go round, I think we'll see a lot more. But both Tonko and Bilirakis were appropriately enthusiastic about the new caucus, and I urge everyone to look up Tonko or Bilirakis in their press release when they launched this. So I think it's really a good sign. They're looking at it from a broad perspective. I wouldn't call them hardcore immortalist in any stretch of the imagination, but they're looking at it from the standpoint of the John Q. public needs this, and it's for public health purposes. So that's what I want to add to that. Caberland gave a good talk. He talks about we don't want sick care. We want, we want Healthspan. I thought that was good, and I'll leave it up to Adam to also have some comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just add a few notes about the event, some of which may just not be obvious to people who haven't been to DC at this kind of event before. Given it was my first, maybe these insights may also resonate with others. So the briefing lasted for an hour and a half or so. It opened with the co-initiators, Bilirakis and Tonko, coming in. They each spoke for maybe 5 minutes or so, and then they didn't stay for the rest of the briefing. So if you think about the communication context here, the scientists who were speaking were really speaking mostly to an audience of people who already support this. I would guess that, and I wonder if Bernie or Dan, you have a different guess, but that more than 50% of the audience were people from the longevity space, and maybe a good amount less were people who were there to be better informed and to learn. Do you guys think that's fair, Dan and Bernie?
Yeah. No, I honestly, I would post it or at around 80%.
Yeah, I didn't want to go that far because I just didn't know all the people there, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either.
It's hard to say. There were quite a few people there who I don't remember seeing at the talk on Wednesday or at the dinner. So, but my guess is it was probably 75%, maybe. It's hard. It's really hard to say.
Which if you, go ahead.
And I don't think there were honestly don't think there were that many staffers there. I happened to sit next to a staffer who I recognized from his badge, and I actually spoke to him afterwards. It turned out he was a staffer with the congresswoman from Puerto Rico. And so he was actually interested in a lot of things that were discussed, and he was interested in AI. So I actually got to speak to a staffer. I didn't really hear that there were many other staffers, but I think there was maybe a handful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, the question that this boils down to is, okay, what is the takeaway that we want to get from the event, right? There's an aspect of it which is a show of strength, meaning there are enough people in this nascent but accelerating industry and category who are willing to fly in all the way to DC to show themselves and participate and present something. Because many in the audience already knew a lot of these things and knew the figures who were speaking. Then there's an aspect of information and education and promulgation of some of these concepts to staffers and to other people. And I wonder, it would be really interesting to hear from Dylan, the founder of A4LI, who some of the other people in the audience may have been and what the takeaways may be. But what it boils down to me, beyond that is, okay, well, afterwards, are there any specific agenda items, or have we moved the needle on the likelihood of a specific congressperson or staffer taking some action or adopting some platform that our community thinks is important? And I will say, while I'm not, it's hard for me to estimate the impact of the briefing itself. It was really quite remarkable that you could just walk into any congressperson's office in Braeburn Building, and I teamed up with Anar, the founder of Ageless RX, after the briefing, and we just walked into a few of his offices. He employs a bunch of people in Illinois. We found the office of the congressperson. It says, "Welcome, come on in," next to each door. And so, we just took that quite literally, stepped on in and asked to speak with the congressperson. And they weren't there. In the 3 cases that we tested, we did Michigan, Illinois, and another state, all contextual to where Ageless has employees or we have a connection. And in all cases, we managed to get the health staffer, and we managed to get 5 to 10 minutes of the staffer in charge of health for the congressperson. And so one of my takeaways that maybe some of the audience is not aware of is just how accessible these people are when you are in DC in person. I found that really quite remarkable, because their attention is limited. And if you can send multiple people recurrently to engage with them, share information, inform them how it may be of value to the constituents of their congressperson, which is, of course, often going to be their primary concern, right? Because they care about getting elected and doing well by their constituents as an important motive. I feel like we have a lot of leverage and could do just so much more in this category. So that's all I would add to that. Oh, one last thing. Sorry. It was pretty interesting that there's a large focus, and I feel like this is almost implicit at this point, about delaying the diseases of aging, but not about staying in high function or youthful function for an extended period, if that makes sense. This expresses itself, I think, in a really clear way in the slide that Dan has on the screen right now, which I think betrays a lot of the problem with this kind of communication around Healthspan is the important thing. If you look at that slide where Matt Kaberlein is showing, the arc of decline in health, and then how we could square that arc, right? So in other words, people would, chug, 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 plop, and suddenly it would be this sharp drop and they die, right? What are we actually talking about here? It's, if you think for a second, it's obvious that they're dying of something, right? So we're not talking about people having the risk profile of 30-year-olds and then suddenly all plopping dead. Mostly we're talking about delaying the diseases of aging, but still having what many of us would consider dramatic, even catastrophic declines in function, simply without heart disease, cancer, etc., and then ending with a compressed period of morbidity, thus also saving a lot of costs, etc., etc. And I just wanted to highlight this because many in the, let's say, longevity or otherwise community do aspire to more than that. Meaning we aspire for people to be at full function, rejuvenated function, great function into a much longer period, maybe indefinitely. And so it's just interesting that where currently the communication is landing is not there. So just want people to be aware of that.
Yeah. And that's really a strategic decision that A4LI has made. And of course, I think, Matt Kaberlein is one on the.
Dan, I have a few comments before you go into the really juicy part about the dinner where Newt Gingrich gave a presentation, which was highly interesting, I thought. One of the things about this meeting that was, I think, important, it's not so much the speakers, but the networking of the 70 or 80 people that attended the event. And it was a couple of nice cocktail receptions and to do that. And I certainly met a broad part of the longevity community. We had Representative Robin Snyder of the Buck Institute was there, celebrity doctor Ronald Primus, who is alleged treats in a concierge longevity practice in New York, Jared, Ivanka, Ludacris, Al Pacino, and Adam Sandler. I'd like to get all of them in a room together. But and others that of great credibility came near and far to come to this. So for our first meeting, it was great. What it did not have, and what Adam pointed out, is we weren't led around or had appointments with different congressional offices. Larger organizations that have been established longer, like the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine that had fly-ins that I attended, or the biotechnology industry, and certain disease-specific organizations, or the Rare Disease Day, rallies around on these fly-ins. And there are dozens and dozens of appointments with policy representatives and occasional lawmakers themselves. We were sort of left on our own if we wanted to do that. Again, this is an inaugural event. And as Adam pointed out, I think, and all of us realize, A4LI doesn't have a firm or detailed policy agenda. It has broad policy goals, including more budget for NIH. I run something called the Healthspan Action Coalition, and we also have broad policy goals, right? What we are trying to do is start to hone those goals into a firm policy initiative, recognizing stakeholders' needs. But this was a formative stage event. I've also attended congressional briefings where they are more organized around really rallying lawmakers and the policy people up and down to attend. Usually that means more than bringing people to speak from the Hill itself, but from the agencies themselves and industry. But I see no reason why A4LI isn't going to be able to move in that direction. They have, what's his name, Michael Stebbins, now on retainer to help them with policy. He was the architect of stem cell policy back in the day, and is an operator. So I think that's a very bright thing for this. There were other interesting folks scattered in from the longevity industry, startup companies that were there that thought this was a good idea to attend, and also some of the venture capital firm, at least one major venture capital firm, I'd say, actually there were two that I recognized were present. So they're clearly interested in the policy aspects of this, which are also important.
Yeah.
I want to.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead.
Can I add
Yeah.
one more thing, Dan? Yeah, those were great additions, Bernie. I want to add one thing that I thought was really interesting. Nobody talked about taxes. So people talk about costs, but they haven't tied it to the tax story here. And I spoke about it with a few people there, and they agreed that this was an opportunity in terms of the way we as a community communicate about this. In the context that, Medicare in 23 had a cost of $820 billion. And just for context, the total income tax receipts in 2023 were 2.6 trillion in the US. So we're talking about, and the majority of these costs, the Medicare costs, I mean, they're aging. Let's not kid ourselves. They're all downstream of aging. And so, it's conceivable that if we could cut the Medicare spend by postponing aging, this would directly be reflected in the potential for tax cuts. And I think any politician would love that story. And so it was interesting. It just never came up, but this was like, it did come up in the conversations that this event enabled. So just want to highlight that.
Yeah. I just wanted to reiterate something Adam said when he was first talking here about the briefing. I also didn't realize how easy it is to talk to Congress people or their staffers. And I found it to be, pretty intimidating. So I didn't really feel confident to be a good spokesperson for A4LI. So I did not go to either my congressperson or any of the other local Congress people. But I think I'm definitely going to try to do that if I go to this again next year, assuming they do it again. Because I also talked with a guy you mentioned from Illinois, and he just went to a lot of different offices and just kind of, gave a brief pitch And so, yeah, I didn't realize you can just sort of walk into these offices without an appointment and talk to staffers. I guess normally they just give you a business card and of
This is a civics exercise, right? You
yeah.
know, going there and walking around the Capitol grounds afterwards, it makes you feel, hey, I'm proud I'm an American. Or that's where they stormed the Capitol, or whatever sites you want to see there. It's a good feeling, I'd say, for most people who are into this, to go and attend an event like this. One of my highlights, I just want to mention, I was introduced to a guy by the name of William Smith sitting in front of me, and very enthusiastic, handsome-looking guy. He's involved in as a doctor involved with geroscience and a consortia. So I wanted to connect with him on LinkedIn. I said, William Smith, there must be a lot of them. Oh, I'm William Kennedy Smith. He's JFK's nephew, and he is involved in DC with a lot of issues. And I made a connection with him. So, you know, that's why it's important to show up at certain events, even though I said I don't want to fly anywhere anymore. This was one of those things that I felt like it was a compelling event as an inaugural meeting to show support for something and to have a voice on the Hill. So, and they put on a good show.
I actually did feel proud to be an American, which doesn't happen that often. I was particularly amazed, again, just how open it was, and that's, I think, shows that you know, we have a strong democracy when basically anyone off the street can go in and talk to someone in their congressperson's office and you know, voice their concern and voice their issues, and that those kind of, from what I gather, those sort of one-on-one meetings with staffers, where you're there face to face, there you can, you know, feel the emotion, that they can feel the emotion, they can feel the you know, the enthusiasm, and the passion you bring. Apparently, those kind of one-on-one interactions have a very big impact, um, compared to, say, letters or, you know, protest, maybe, you know, other types of activity people might do. So yeah, I definitely hope to be involved in that to some extent next year. That yeah, so yeah, going on here, there was one other point that I made a note of, which was from Kristen Fortney's talk. Because because I've been interested in the FDA, I made a note. She said, there's no way to get drugs for sarcopenia muscle loss through the FDA. I think I'd heard that before. I still can't believe that, because you would think muscle loss is kind of a clear disease or problem that can be, you know, quantified, and it definitely increases your risk of getting fractures. So it's not good. But yeah, she said there's no pathway at the FDA for that. But yeah, going on to the next day, there was a dinner, right? And sorry, these slides are a bit jumbled, but let's see. Let me just give me a second.
It was quite a luxurious dinner, from what I understand. It was in a nice space with a chandelier. This is actually on the cover image for the salon, and Newt Gingrich spoke at this dinner. I listened to the recording that you provided of his remarks, and I did post that in the YouTube chat if anybody would like to download it and
Well,
listen to
no,
it.
I wouldn't share that. I don't know if I don't think they wanted that like publicly available. But I did see other people recording it.
Yeah,
But
they're not going to do anything to us. You can share it. What would happen? As long as you both blame Dan, it's okay.
yeah, I recorded on my phone. There was a reporter there. There was a guy from Lifespan IO who writes articles for them. I forgot his name, but I saw him recording it.
Karimazin.
Yeah, and he was recording it with like a professional recording device. But yeah, I recorded on my phone, and I just went back and listened to the recording today, to kind of refresh myself, and it was actually quite a good talk. It was really given. I think it was given off the cuff. But he's somebody who has a lot of experience figuring out how to get politicians to agree. He was speaker at a time when he was dealing with a Democrat president, and they were trying to get bipartisan legislation pushed through Congress. And so let's see. Before I get to that, there was a cocktail hour that was kind of fun, and I agree with what Bernie said. A big part of this was just networking, and a lot of the value I think the attendees got was networking. And so the cocktail hour was a great opportunity for that. And Newt Gingrich showed up as well. I actually spoke to him about AI, just giving him some basic points about how AI could be used for personalized medicine. And he was pretty receptive. And I also introduced Newt to our friend Ed Hudgens, who says he worked with Newt Gingrich, maybe not directly, but kind of worked with his office in the 90s. And so he really wanted to talk to Newt, so they got a chance to talk. But yeah, so then we went to the dinner, and sorry, these slides are kind of out of order. I'll talk about Ken Bogner in a minute. Let me talk about Newt Gingrich's talk. Like I said, I went through and listened to it because it wasn't like a polished, prepared presentation, but he made a lot of great points, actually. So first of all, he said that when you're going to do something like this, it has to be nonpartisan, which is what which is how A4LI is approaching it. Obviously, everyone deals with aging or has relatives who are dealing with age-related diseases. So you would think this should be pretty easy to pull off, getting both parties involved. Another point he made is he said the National Institutes of Health has become the National Institutes of Biology. Meaning that it was originally founded to promote the public health, but now they are doing a lot of just pure science research on, the genetics of, the African shrew, or, random biology stuff, mice studies, and studies of different organisms that are not humans. So I hadn't actually thought that. I always thought that it was kind of cool. The National Institute of Health was doing pure biology and pure science research, because I always viewed that as sort of the primary role of government, to do the kind of fundamental research that private entities aren't always willing to do. But I think he had a good point. Like they're maybe not focusing on what's actually going to translate to benefit taxpayers. So I thought that was interesting. He talked about how you have to deal with people who are trying to protect their own funds. He gave like an anecdote about somebody they were working with in a project to deal with Alzheimer's, and it turned out that guy, he later confided that and admitted that he was actually the whole time trying to prevent more funding going to Alzheimer's, because he was trying to protect the funding going to cancer. So, that's people who have a lot of funding right now are whenever you propose new funding, the people who have funding right now get worried that their funding might be shifted over to this new funding. So I thought that was kind of interesting. What else? Let's see. He talked about the split between people who know the technical stuff and people who can communicate to the everyday person. He talked about C.P. Snow, who he had some kind of article or book or something about the two cultures. He was talking about how there was a split between the science world and academia and the humanities world. And he said people who know couldn't explain anything, and the people who could actually explain things actually know nothing. So that's like a perennial challenge, is figuring out how to communicate effectively. And it's especially important when you're talking to congressmen who, probably spent their whole life in politics. I think Gus Bilrakis was an engineer. So he's kind of technically minded, but a lot of these Congress people were, kind of probably political science majors or humanities majors. So their eyes kind of might glaze over when you get into the technical stuff. So that was another challenge that he identified. And then let's see, what else do I have? He said, we don't need to reform the FDA. We need a new model. That's a pretty bold statement, talking about how we might even need like a new agency. He said, the bureaucracy cannot keep up with the pace of change. If we start talking about projects that take 30 years to approve, the FDA will become a major inhibitor. Obviously, I agree with that, but I'm not necessarily in favor of totally getting rid of the FDA. That's probably going to be a non-starter with most people in government, but I definitely agree there needs to be major changes. Another point he made, which also is interesting, something I had never really heard of, he said if researchers drag out their research, they have an incentive to drag out their research to get more grants. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not really sure how you counter that, but kind of just it's important to hold researchers to high standards, and I don't think we're doing a good job of that right now. David Wood on YouTube says the CPC no quote might have been applicable in 1959, but there have been counterexamples since then. For instance, Richard Feynman and Steven Pinker. Yeah, Richard Feynman is a great example because he testified before Congress about the Challenger explosion, and he had the famous demonstration where he had the rubber O-ring and all of that. So, yeah, he was also very charismatic, and he just seemed like very kind of friendly, and yeah, he was a good kind of advocate for science.
Are you talking about Newt?
No, Richard Feynman.
Oh, right.
Yeah, David Wood on YouTube. Just
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. Anyway, so let's go on here. He mentioned FDA would probably not approve aspirin today. That's something I've heard. I looked that up. And yeah, the issues with the potential for gastrointestinal distress, that means that aspirin would probably not pass through the safety screening standards that the FDA has today. Another example I read about online is penicillin, which is essential medication for bacterial infections, I guess. They say allergic reactions to penicillin kill a higher percentage of its takers than Vioxx ever did. So Vioxx was a drug, I believe, for I guess as an anti-inflammatory that was approved in the 90s, I think. And there was a big scandal where the FDA ultimately had to take it off the market because there was a small percentage of people who had really severe reactions, and that wasn't something the FDA had warned about. And some people say that the Vioxx scandal has led to stricter standards at the FDA. Of course, as we know from previous Enlightenment salons, it doesn't make sense to have a uniform bar for safety. It should be looking at the risk versus benefit, and if there's a high need for something, and someone's going to potentially die if they don't get it, then it makes sense to have a higher risk tolerance. But the FDA doesn't necessarily do a good job of risk benefit analysis yeah. So anyway, let's see. Another thing he said was public sentiment is everything. People want something. Members of Congress will realize that they want that too. It's pretty obvious, but it's still interesting to hear his kind of philosophy on how to influence Congress. Because some people say you don't have to convince the public. You just have to get in the right circles in DC and kind of network with the power players and just convince them. That's sort of the inside track, and I think a lot of lobbyists and think tank people try to do that. But yeah, Newt Gingrich is saying we need that the public kind of drives a lot of what goes on in Congress. And somebody pointed out that was actually kind of riffing off a quote from Abraham Lincoln.
Well, he attributed it to Lincoln.
Did he? I thought
that happens to be my favorite quote. I like that all the time. So,
okay. Yeah. And so that's kind of all my comments on that. And maybe we can discuss it more. But I wanted to go back and also talk about Ken Bogner, because Ken Bogner was there. He spoke at the dinner as well. And he's a state senator from Montana, and he's now running for Congress. And he's a huge proponent of longevity biotech. He had some tweets on Twitter that you can read that kind of gave a lot of the common talking points that we give. And then he pushed through this right to try bill in Montana. The FDA recently expanded their right to try through Congress. I should say Congress. Congress forced the FDA to expand right to try, but with the national right to try legislation, you need to have a terminal illness. And so what they've done in Montana is they've opened it up a bit more to really anyone, as long as they can testify that they have tried all the available options that might be reasonably tried, and then they have both a physician and the patient approve trying an experimental therapy that hasn't not yet been FDA approved. And then the other point, which is interesting, is that the patient has to waive their liability. So they can't sue the drug companies if something goes wrong, as far as I understand it. And I'm not sure if that's something in the national level right to try. I'm guessing it's not, because I hadn't heard about that.
No, this is the first time
yeah.
that right to try legislation in the United States extended to non-terminal or allegedly non-terminal conditions. Daniel Tweet does point out in our chat, aging is a pretty terminal illness, and Jason Geringer agrees. We're all terminal at this stage. I just wish we could get the broader public and politicians and federal regulators to recognize that, but the right to try bill in Montana is definitely a major step forward in this regard. So I salute Kenneth Bogner and his efforts in this. I think he could be a definite ally of ours. In fact, under our Transhumanist Party constitution, as we reformed it in 2020, we are able to endorse other parties' candidates as long as they profess a public support for longevity science and life extension research. So I would say we could even consider endorsing Kenneth Bogner in a future vote.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Dan, would you mind if I make a little comment? And because I have to get off in a couple of minutes. Dan, you've done a great job in summarizing all of these things. I thought just a little color. I have no particular love for Newt Gingrich, but I have to say 100% of what he said I agree with. He came across as a futurist, someone that wants to reform the regulatory system with a base understanding of the problems in NIH and scientific research that is not going and it's not being translated. So to that extent, he's a real ally of the cause of longevity / health span, in my view. The only thing I liked about him is he wrote a scary novel about a pulse attack on the United States. That was pretty good, but I didn't like anything else about him. But I did like this. It was folksy, and he told one of the fabled stories about Ronald Reagan in the end, about what an optimist is. So I'm not going to share that with you. But the fact that A4LI pulled this off and brought him in is not lost on any of us. That's a coup. And as long as it doesn't drive away people from the other side of the aisle. So I was really nervous about that, but I viewed the audience as a nonpartisan audience for this, which was very effective. And it was great that Adam and Dan were there. And I don't know if I saw you, Adam, there, but I look forward to, yes. But Dan, I spent some time with you, sat at my table, so it was good to see you. So I just want to thank you, Gennady, for reminding me how valuable this salon is, and I'm sorry I have to leave a little early.
Yes, of course. And thank you, Bernie, very much for contributing your reflections upon the A4LI event. I think these were quite valuable, and I'd like to echo your observations. I think this event was an important milestone in enabling the longevity science community to have a direct line of communication to eminent political figures, including Newt Gingrich. By the way, interestingly enough, I used to be an instrumental Republican very briefly in 2012 because I wanted to get Ron Paul to secure the Republican nomination. My efforts, in combination with the efforts of others in Nevada, did enable the election of a Nevada delegation in support of Ron Paul. So with all due respect to Newt Gingrich, I did not support him in that primary, but I did find some of his comments and proposals interesting. At that time, he was proposing for the United States to construct bases on the moon. And actually, I thought that was one of his most interesting and sympathetic proposals. Of course, I would as a transhumanist, but a lot of Republicans kind of lambasted him for doing that. And I think that's unfortunate. I do think he has a strong futurist streak, which should be cultivated and encouraged, particularly since he has less to lose now as an emeritus politician. And if we could get him on our side with these pro-longevity, pro-futurist types of statements, that would be excellent for our cause. And listening to his speech, I found that it resonated with me from the standpoint of policy and from the standpoint of his outlook toward the future. He pointed out, by the way, that the next 10 to 15 years are going to be turbulent and fraught with risks. But if we can get through those without major problems, major derailments like a nuclear war, which he's also extremely concerned about, then we would have a really bright future indeed, because all of these emerging technologies are going to lead to major improvements. And this is a vision that's very much aligned with the vision of those who posit a coming technological singularity, and indeed the vision of many transhumanists. He just doesn't use those terms, but he has thought about the issues enough to actually see those possibilities. So thank you very much, Bernie, for your observations.
Yeah. No, I agree. I probably should have started with that point that Newt Gingrich is really seen to be a futurist, and optimistic about the future, but at the same time, he is worried about nuclear war. It's like, which is important. Yeah, he also said he had kind of a selfish interest in longevity because he's 80 years old. But yeah, I think he is a valuable asset for A4LI. Just even though he's become very controversial, he's become very controversial due to his support of Trump. I still think he's a valuable asset given his knowledge of how to work in the DC system, and also he is still making a lot of media appearances on places like Fox News, and he's still like a kind of a major voice. But yeah, probably not something you want to, if you're talking about A4LI with someone, it's probably not something you want to mention right off the bat, unless they're a Republican, I guess. So yeah. But anyway, I was just going to say, people should check out Ken Bogner's campaign. Check him out on Twitter. Maybe give him a small donation. if you feel comfortable with that. He's got a bit of an uphill battle because he's running against like 10 other people or 9 other people. So I'm sure he would appreciate the support. And yeah, if he becomes elected, he's going to be a really valuable ally for the longevity movement. And then the only other thing I wanted to say is really I want to encourage people to get involved with A4LI if they're not already. The way they bring in money is through a membership system primarily. So they rely on people joining as members. The base membership is actually very affordable now. It's just $50 a year. So I think that's a great investment because they're kind of a very unique organization. There is another organization called AFAR, which advocates, I think, for like research in gerontology and stuff. But and there was actually someone from AFAR there, but they are. I mean, they're not the sort of people who are advocating radical life extension, or they're not like the kind of futurist people. They're, as far as I understand, that comprise most of A4LI membership. So I think A4LI is a very unique organization doing a lot of great work. So people should join, and then if you go on their website, they have some petitions that you can sign. Yeah, I don't know if we want to go over those, but just definitely check out the petitions. And then of course, if they're probably going to do another one of these fly-ins next year, and the first day, the talks on the first day and the congressional briefings are free to attend. Other than figuring out how you're going to get there. I highly recommend it. Even just as an experience to educate yourself on the process, even if you're not necessarily going to go pitch to Congress people and their staffers. I feel like it was valuable just as an educational experience. And they like having lots of people in the room. So, don't feel like you need a lot of experience with, lobbying Congress to participate. Yeah, right. So I'm going to probably go in about 15 minutes, but I feel like maybe we should open the floor if Adam has further comments.
Yeah, thanks all. So I'll go from the top, just from day 1 to day 2, just a few points that hadn't been made. One was that Michael Stebbins, the initiator or one of the driving forces behind ARPA-H, mentioned that the main problem is, in his mind, was inequity. So why do some people have a health span of 60 and others a health span of 75 or 80, etc.? It's something to keep in mind. As you all can imagine, this vector of thinking may lend itself to more administrative interventions rather than structural interventions or scientific interventions, so behavioral interventions and so forth. Separately, during the talk, at some point, Jeff Lang asked, "What is geoscience anyway?" and was trying to focus on how the important thing was getting things into the clinic, to which Matt Caberline responded from the audience describing what geoscience was. I just wanted to highlight that because there is, despite this kind of movement to create more communication engagement, I think there's still a lot of gaps in terms of understanding what geoscience is and what kind of the agendas are. Also, among nobody on the panel, Arunan, Michael Stebbins, or Jeffrey Lang, nor to some degree some of the conversation in the briefing, was there as much of an acknowledgement that 20 years from now, everything is going to be completely different with AI and other things that are happening. And so it's this irony where we're talking about like, yeah, it's going to take 10 years, to get something through the phase trial system. But really, they're only 20 years or maybe 15 years or so before I think many of us expect dramatic changes as a result of the exponential technologies which are starting to happen. And that disconnect is really just very wide. So there doesn't seem to be much acknowledgement or kind of connecting that story to these other intersecting stories. Another quick note, Kristen Fortney did also mention that sarcopenia is considered a treatable condition or disease in Japan and elsewhere, which brought up the thought that, maybe they should go through that regulatory process. But of course, the US is the big prize in terms of market size and other benefits. So I expect that's the reason they're going for the US. But I wonder, I didn't ask her, but it would be interesting to find out if they would also consider going through trials in Japan, if that process could be done in parallel. Another small note about Ken Bogner, now going to the second day. A local race in cost often will cost about 1.5 million per candidate. This is not exact, but just to give a ballpark. And so I mentioned this, getting $100,000, for example, from the national stage to a local like this is actually very material. So it's conceivable that if we as a community who cares about longevity find some candidates that can really be in our corner, whether they're on the longevity caucus or running for Congress, et cetera, and we step up and donate to their campaigns, we could actually make a very big difference because our community is not that small and the amounts of funding required are actually something we can make a dent in. It's not true of all races. Some very high profile races get as much as $10 million, but many of these races, especially in a place like Montana, may not be as expensive. So that's a kind of a supporting the idea that if you think that Ken Bogner may be interesting, I would recommend donating to his campaign, and I intend to donate to his campaign. Obviously, he has other positions you may want to look into, so I won't go into that, but just as a note for our value as a community. And then finally, I just want to say one last thing, which is that, there's a fundamental question, which is very nuanced, but extremely important. And that is, what is the problem? Is it death or suffering? Which is the core problem? Which is the primary problem? And, the vitalist position on that is very clear. Death is the core problem. It's in the first line of the Vitalist Declaration. Everybody who becomes a Vitalist must agree with this, etc. And yet, I would say that the vast majority of organizations, without trying to hypothesize what their position is, if you go to their websites, and this is true of anybody from any of the organizations, I won't name names, but any of the big organizations you guys know in the longevity space, actually almost none of them or none of them even mention the word death on the homepage, whereas Vitalism does multiple times. Mention this is the following: if suffering is the problem and not, there is a very strong gravity to basically to move to move resources to address the suffering and not the death. And what do we mean by the suffering? The suffering could be diseases of aging, cancer, heart disease, dementia. In other words, if you are heavily degraded as a 90-year-old, you can't run as much, you can't do stuff as much, you can't do anything, etc. Your IQ has gone down by 40% or whatever it is. This is not a problem because you are not in that high of a state of suffering, potentially, compared to somebody, for example, who is suffering from, I don't know, depression or poverty or some other vicissitude of life. And so I think one of the biggest risks that we face is that if we pursue an agenda which is based on the idea that suffering is the problem, ultimately, the vast majority of funding will always gravitate towards the diseases of aging because they are the source of the suffering and not the fundamental problem, which is aging, the core problem of aging in itself. And so I just wanted to highlight that because that always will be part of the conversation, because as these politicians listen to the argument, invest in geroscience, invest in the basic problem, the root cause, et cetera, what they're thinking of is, well, okay, what are the comparable initiatives that I could put money in? And it's obvious why things like Alzheimer's do get a $2.5 billion mandate at the NIH and under the NIA. And that's because they cause an incredible amount of suffering and costs. And so that kind of issue is, I think, it sounds very, I would say, like a detail, but it actually underpins this entire enterprise. And I want to highlight that. That's all.
Yes, thank you very much, Adam. And now your comments have motivated me to put an anti-death statement on the front page of the U.S. Transhumanist Party website, though, of course, we have a lot of anti-death statements on the website as a whole, but I did write a book called Death is Wrong. So obviously, I would agree with you that death is the principal problem that we need to overcome. I do think there are different rhetorical strategies that could appeal to different people, and I'm enough of a pragmatist that I'm willing to cobble together essentially a coalition of the willing, anybody who will move with us incrementally in the direction we desire. But it's definitely important that we not lose sight of what our ultimate goal is. So now I think this is a good opportunity to open up the discussion for questions. And let's start with Jose Cordeiro and then go to Zack Varkaris after that.
Yes, this is a great session, and I like that we are taking this discussion into the political realm. I am connecting from Spain, and in Spain, life expectancy is 6 years longer than in the USA. 6 years longer, which is quite incredible, you could say, because also medical expenditure in the USA is easily twice as big, both public and private, than in Spain. So how with so much more money spent in health, people die much younger in the USA? So this is one point to think about. And I thought that the video at the beginning, the video that Dan showed, actually talks about that, why people are dying so relatively young in the USA. Anyway, going back to the political realm, many other countries are doing similar things. You are probably aware that in the United Kingdom, there was the all-party parliamentary group on longevity. Also in Germany, there is a longevity party. In Spain, also, I created a longevity movement, and I was candidate for the European Parliament. And I got 7,000 votes in one quick election. Not enough to become member of the European Parliament, but a lot of votes. I don't know, 7,000 people in Madrid, to put it clearly. So there is interest about longevity, and we need to keep on pushing on this through the public and through the political system. So I'm not totally convinced the political parties are the ideal mechanism. I tried that again. And as I mentioned, my campaign was saying, I'm not from the left and I am not from the right. I'm from the future and we want longevity. Anyway, so we need to keep on pushing this. So one thing that we have to do is to celebrate October 1st, which is International Longevity Day. And all of us, all over the world, have to sign the Dublin Longevity Declaration. This is a very important document, the Dublin Longevity Declaration, so that more and more people, not just scientists, are aware that this is scientific and that this is real and that this is very, very near, very close. So those were my comments. If there are some comments from Adam or Dan who were there, happy to hear quickly.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, pointing out the difference in life expectancy. Also, like Japan has a much higher life expectancy. There's that probably diet plays a big role, but I don't think we need to get into that right now. But yeah, that there's probably some like probably not going to get people to change their diet and lifestyle. So that's probably a reason to support longevity biomedicine as the path forward, the easiest path forward.
I'll just say that I think with Ken Bogner, we probably have a unique chance to get somebody who's really aligned with us into Congress. But in general, these initiatives and the Longevity Caucus at large are probably, or could be the highest leverage use of capital and resources for us, the way I see it, just because they control such incredible budgets in the government, and it really just does seem plausible that they could be impacted.
Yeah, and I like it. I like what you said about Ken Bogner's campaign. And he basically just has to win the primary campaign because he's in a very Republican leaning district. And you know, if anyone feels hesitant to donate to a Republican, the way you could think about this is kind of from the perspective of what the counterfactual would be, because if he is not elected, it's going to be a Republican anyway, right? And my impression, just looking over his website, is he's not like a crazy Trump Republican, so yeah, I definitely think he's worth supporting. He seemed genuinely passionate about longevity. He's kind of taking it up as sort of his own, you know, his kind of a unique issue that sets him apart from other people, right? So yeah, and I definitely agree with what Adam said. There was some discussion actually at the event about having a longevity party, but honestly, that's super hard to do. You know,
we are the longevity party.
Yeah.
Officially, we are because they merged with us in 2020.
Yeah. But you know, the Transhumanist Party is great, but I view what the Transhumanist Party is doing as more education than and awareness. It's a vehicle for education and awareness. And so it's a complementary thing to A4LI, but I kind of agree with what Adam's saying. On a dollar per dollar basis, probably there's more leverage donating to like A4LI than say Transhumanist Party, unless or at this stage. And so yeah, totally agree. And there's a lot of other, again, it's a unique organization. Yeah.
All right, so do look into Kenneth Bach. Those are not mutually exclusive to donations to A4LI. You can do both. But let's go to Zack Varkaris for his question or comment.
Thanks, Dan. That was really good. I only caught the last 2/3 of it, but it sounded great. But I have one question for you. In your opinion, when you're hearing everything that was being said, what is the best route that people would agree on? Because we're a democracy, supposedly, and so we're supposed to vote on something en masse. Is there what was the project that would be appeal to the largest group of senators or congressmen that would actually get it passed, that would have the most effect? Was there any discussions about that?
Yeah, no, there would. I mean, there's a couple different initiatives. So the first is really around ARPA-H and getting them to invest in longevity biomedicine. Right now, they don't have any program managers that are focused on aging or longevity, and ultimately they want to have 100 program managers. And so we hope that at least one of those is leading something focused on longevity, ideally focused on treating aging as the underlying illness and attacking the root cause.
What I meant is like, okay, so people are aging, fine, we're all aging, but if you apply it to something practical, like you need a skill set in the society, and they've got to live longer and stronger. They're too expensive to retrain someone new. Have they identified any industries like that could have some benefit for longevity, like maybe having a steel worker that can work for 50 years instead of 20 or something?
Well, I mean, I think every industry would benefit, since you can keep your trained employees around that have longer, who have, who have the most training and expertise that they've accumulated over many, many years. So, are there some industries that might benefit more? Probably. I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. I don't know. Adam, do you have? I guess I just wanted to say, like, they have a couple different things they're pushing. One is more research dollars invested, and then the other thing is better pathways through the FDA, and then I guess what came up a bit was having things available to everyone. But yeah, I don't know if does Adam, do you have any comments on that?
Well, I would just say that there are a few vectors in change at that level. One vector is taking a resource allocation that exists, like, for example, the mandate for Alzheimer's at the NIA, which is 2.5 billion, and saying, hey, we're going to take a slice of that away, and we're going to reallocate it to something that we think is more appropriate, like neuroscience. Now, clearly, that's going to ruffle more feathers, because that would be taking away rather than just incrementing budget, which would also be competitive because other people will want that budget. And the NIH budget in many years has increased year over year more than inflation. So there is sometimes actually more money to go around. So that's like one vector. Now, how would you get that kind of change to happen? Well, the House Appropriations Committee for Health and Human Services has 17 members. So you can imagine if some of the members on that committee really care about this issue, Well, there could be gravity to it, right? Because it's always this horse trading around different issues that people bring to the table. So is it conceivable now today, out of the NIA budget of 3.5 billion, about 300 million, a little more, according to Matt Kaberlein and others, goes to the basic causes of aging, or what we would call the geroscience hypothesis, so understanding the root of aging. So you could conceivably move, let's say, 300 million from that 2.5 billion allocation, or from new money, and you would have doubled the total amount of money today going to research. This is conceivable within a few years. I mean, there's an election this year. There's another election for Congress the following 2 years after that. And so that's one way. Now, when you talk about changes like changing an agency, so creating a new pathway for longevity medicines, which is a parallel pathway to the FDA, there's going to be a lot more involvement from other stakeholders. It's the agencies that already exist. It's going to have to run through the Senate, et cetera, et cetera. It's not like you're just negotiating about a particular budget, and if you have one committee that you have a lot of support in, then the Senate committee, which is the parallel committee for Health and Human Services, might collaborate with you because they want something else from you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas when you're talking about this new parallel body, it's going to be much harder, and that's why ARPA-H having happened in the first place is a minor miracle. It's not often that federal agencies get created, and so I would say you have this kind of leveling, right, at the national level. Moving budgets around or kind of allocating new budgets, I think, is like the light level. Creating parallel tracks in existing agencies, or like forking some existing pathways, sounds to me like medium. Creating new agencies sounds like very hard. So I don't know if that adds some color to it. That's at least how I think about it a little bit. And then, of course, if you reduce it to the state level, some of the hurdles are even lower, just like the expanded right to try could pass in Montana, really mostly due to the leadership of this one state senator.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's another point, is that I hadn't even thought about, was you can also work on the state level. And I met somebody who's trying to do that in Massachusetts. So there's a lot of different avenues. Unfortunately I have to run now, but thanks for everyone.
Yes, thank you very much, Dan, for your thorough presentation and your insights, and for answering some of the questions. We still have Adam on, and we have about 7 minutes in our salon. So let's get to a few more questions while we are here. Ben, do you have any questions or comments based on what has been presented?
I suppose I would put to you, Adam, then what did you see these last 2 days, or those 2 days, that kind of made you most optimistic? And also, like, what might you expect to see happen at ARPA-H, or maybe Congress, like in the next year, that'd be like, oh, they're on board with this longevity mission?
Thank you. So most optimistic is the degree of access and the degree to which we have really not even scratched the surface here. So in other words, for many people in this category, or who care about this common goal, this was the first time they were even engaging in DC. And that's remarkable, given the juxtaposition of the relative ease of access that surprised Dan and myself and others. And some of these people, my friend, he employs a company with, I don't know, close to 100 employees, large amounts of revenue, et cetera. I mean, he could go to his congressperson and they would listen, just because he's employing a lot of people right in the state. And there are all sorts of reasons and levers that we could use as a category of people that I think are just tremendously underutilized right now. And so that's a very big cause of optimism. Secondly, I can see multiple people, certainly Ken Bogner, as being truly motivated allies and potentially long-term allies. And so when you say, what could we see in a year or in 3 years, I'd say it's plausible in my mind that we would have multiple people who really resonate with our worldview. And I say our, you know, there are probably some differences even in this audience, but people who believe that the root cause of aging is the root cause, is the thing that really needs attention, and that science and technology is the transformative tool that can develop humanity and benefit humanity. And so insofar as that categorizes it, it seems to me that we could very plausibly have a few program directors, at least, maybe 3 to 5 at ARPA-H who have these views. And that would mean that each one of these people have leverage towards a budget of $60 to $100 million for relevant projects. So I think that's very plausible. It could happen in the next 1 to 3 years. I know at least of one program manager who shares our views, who's been offered a position, and I believe there will be others. So that's really good news. And then regarding budgets, et cetera, I'd say that if Ken Bogner gets in, and if we do our work well in communicating with the Longevity Caucus, it's conceivable also to me that we may have budget allocations that are non-trivial. So in the millions, maybe many millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars, maybe more, that would otherwise not have gone to specific research or initiatives. So that would be the optimistic. I mean, it's not like insanely optimistic, but I think this could happen in a couple of years.
Yes, thank you very much, Adam. And let's see if we can get in a question from Art Ramon as well in the last 3 minutes.
Yeah, I wrote that several years ago. It says SOCOM and Metro Biotech were doing research with NAD+, and that was in the 2022 federal fiscal year. So how does SOCOM, do this? I know DARPA has a biological technology office, and under there they have a warfighter readiness, which I always thought was like the super soldier program, where they would want some sort of longevity research being done for, eventually when Space Force has, people going out into deep space. So do you know anything about this U.S. SOCOM, doing this research with Metro Biotech?
I'm afraid I don't.
Okay.
Yes, that may be something to look into subsequently. Now, Jose also wonders when the next fly-in will be. All I know from Dylan Livingston is he does plan to hold a 2025 fly-in. I wonder, Adam, if you've heard anything about a date for the next event?
Yeah, so I have not, but I did want to note in this context that there was this conversation going on at the event where, they were saying next year there could be double the number of people, et cetera, et cetera. I'll just say, like, look, attending the dinner costs $750. Okay. I mean, in my view, having people who share our values at this kind of event, and that being the primary voice that the politicians and others are exposed to, is really invaluable. It's just so much more valuable than $750. And so I'm going to encourage every single company to, send with executives who share our values, to send 1 or 2 executives. I mean, for Christ's sake, they can expense it. They can expend $750, and for others of us who can afford to go, I would say we should really, really double down and make next year's event not only much larger, so double or triple the size. This one was about 60 to 80 people for context, but also make sure that it's people who share the views that we want to promote.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Adam. And we really appreciate your insightful glimpses into this fly-in event. For those who weren't able to attend, I think this has been a great recapitulation, and it enables them to keep up with all of the great conversations and presentations that transpired there. So thank you to our panel as well for the excellent questions. Thank you to our engaged audience, and I hope that we can all live long and prosper.